So now that we've spent some time looking at paper one and going through all the things you need to do to be successful at that paper, now it makes sense to start looking at paper two. And what we're going to start with, obviously, we're going to be looking at question one. If you've done question one on paper one, you'll be very familiar with this question because it's exactly the same skill assessment objective to look at. So here's the assessment objective again. As you can see, it's completely the same as the one from paper one. Again, it's that idea of identifying and interpreting explicit and implicit information. Whereas if you look at question one on paper one, it was very much more along the lines of if it's there, copy it over. This one, you do have to dig under the surface, even at the very beginning, because it's not always as clear cut as you first think. Always important to remember is that you should read both of the passages before you start looking at the questions. Remember, in this paper you'll get two. You'll get a contemporary text from around about now, and you'll get one from the 19th century, so anywhere within the last really 100 years beyond. And they will be linked by theme, but that will be all. So a couple that we've looked at are, for example, an article about school from The Guardian, which we'll look at in the next page, linked to a series of letters written by a son to his father in 1822. So the link is school, but they're very, very different types of texts. So this is what a typical question looks like, very straightforward. You are told which source you need to focus on, and so far it's always been from the contemporary source, the modern one, and you're told which lines to look at. You are given 8 statements. Now we are told that 4 of them are true, and obviously meaning that 4 are false. It also tells you that you need to shade the boxes. Now this is very important because this question will actually be marked by a machine or a computer. So you need to shade in the lozenges on the right hand side. You can't just tick. So you've got to be very careful about the 4 that you put down. On the outside it looks like a very simple question. It seems like a very easy 4 marks. However, it certainly isn't as easy as it first appears. And I would say it's a bit trickier than paper 1, question 1. And we'll have a look in a moment. So here's the passage here, and I've included lines 1 to 15, and this is where that question was asking you to look at. So what I'd like you to do now is just spend a little bit of time reading through this particular passage, and then on the next slide I'd like you to answer the questions that we've had a look at. So here are the questions again. Have a look through all 8. Remember, some of them are quite obvious and some of them were actually there in the text for you to find, very straightforward. But there's at least 2 in this paper that may cause a bit of confusion, so you've got to be a bit careful about what you're going to choose. So read them through all very, very carefully. Okay, so let's have a quick look then at the mark scheme. So if we have a look at A, Jay Rayner has good memories of his time in school. Well, that's pretty straightforward. He never mentions that at all. In fact, most of it is him talking about how much he didn't like school, particularly didn't like getting feedback from teachers. So we know that one is false. Also then talks about Jay Rayner was happy to help his son with his homework. It's very clear in that second paragraph that the dad is very much far from happy to help his son. He's very uncomfortable with helping his son and tries to say things to actually not go ahead with it. So he's not happy to help his son with the homework at all. So as a boy, Jay Rayner worried about handing his homework in on Monday mornings. Now that's true. Now this is actually one of the first ones that causes a bit of confusion because nowhere in those 15 lines does it say Monday morning. However, he talks about, particularly in the first paragraph, how he got that horrible Sunday night feeling. So we can assume that he's talking about handing in the homework on the Monday and then getting the feedback from the teachers. So although that, for most students, they found that one quite easy, there's that little thing there about the Monday morning that might have thrown a few students. So in D, again, I think D's really straightforward. Jay Rayner could not think of a food metaphor to help his son because it's printed there right on the page, and that one's straightforward for us to look at. Looking at E, Jay Rayner was very able in school. It's very clear from the last paragraph he wasn't, so we know that one's false. We're looking at F. I'm sorry that it's all linked up here, but F, as a boy, Jay Rayner did not enjoy doing homework. That one is true, and again, that's pretty clear from there, from the passage. You can actually say what he's written down there. In G, Jay Rayner looked forward to receiving feedback from his teachers. Well, he actually tells us that he isn't, so we know that one is false. Now, this is the one that has definitely caused a bit of confusion, and some students weren't sure whether this was the right one. Jay Rayner makes a joke to cover up his own real exam results. Now again, he's not clearly saying, oh, by the way, here I have made a joke here. He makes a very light-hearted comment about his grades looking like Pac-Man doing the conga. So if you are read that passage well enough, you've understood it, you know that he's tried to make light of the situation now. So from this, you can tell that there's going to be 2 or 3 points that are going to be really straightforward, that they're going to be definitely true. But there may be one, possibly two, that will be a little bit more obscure, that you have to dig underneath the surface. The way to deal with this is to go through each of them, each of the points, and say, is this true or is this false? Because what you'll end up doing is actually getting rid of the ones that are definitely false, leaving you with fewer choices to focus on, and that will actually make this question easy. So unlike question 1 in paper 1, where you don't actually need to spend the 5 minutes doing that question, here using the 5 minutes or the whole 5 minutes will probably be more useful. So now we're going to have another go. Again, on the next slide, I'd like you to read through the passage. I'd like you to give yourself some time to read through the passage, read it through more than once, just to become familiar with it, and then go on to the next slide and answer the questions. So here's the passage. As you can see, it's lines 1 to 14. It's from a writer who is writing about going to a Glastonbury Festival for the first time. She's meeting up with a man called Anton, who's introducing her to Glastonbury Festival. Read through his passage twice and then move on to the next slide. So here we have again our 8 statements. 4 we know are true, 4 are false. Read through each of them, work out which ones are true, and then on the next slide we'll go through the mark scheme. Remember, some of them are really obvious, but not all of them are. Okay, so first of all, A, Anton is standing in water covered in mud. Couldn't get simpler than that. It's literally there in the first line. No real issues there. Anton is being carried away by the current. Now this one is a real kind of one that I've seen a lot of the exam boards put in. If you read that very, very quickly, you would assume that's what happened. But if you actually look at it, it says that he was at risk of being carried away. Clearly the writer is using hyperbole, exaggeration, to really make the point of just how wet this place is. But for a reader who has read very, very quickly, who hasn't really taken any information, that actually could be one that a lot of students put down as true. Glastonbury is a scene of near total devastation. Again, that's almost word for word what she says in the article, so that shouldn't cause us any problems. The moorings of the tents are floating down the hillside. That's false. The writer is shivering and caught in a thunderstorm. Also false. Neither of D or E have been written in there at all. F, half naked people are running after their tents. Again, nice and straightforward. That one's definitely in there, so that one's true. So far, A, C and F, we haven't had to really look for too much about it. They're in there in the text. But it's the last two that might cause the most confusion. At first, the writer was not pleased to be sent to Glastonbury. Now, this is one of those ones that she's not actually said that, but you can read that through in the passage. You get that impression. So it's one of those ones that's a bit more complicated, and you're going to have to make sure you read it to get that nuance coming through. And H, the writer was not surprised to find that it was wet and muddy. Of course, there we know that one's false. So what you've got there, again, are 3 that are really straightforward, quite obvious, and you can pick them out, and 1 that you need to, again, dig underneath the surface. And that's the key to this particular paper. It should be an easy 4 marks, but a lot of students in all the different sets that I've been teaching this year have been getting 3 out of 4, and it's been that last tricky one. So spend a bit longer on this question, make sure you go through it, make sure you're comfortable with it, and that's going to get you the whole 4 marks out of 4 marks. Not much else to say about this one. You've done revision on this one as well. You've been doing work in your classrooms. I don't need to spend too much longer on it at all. However, if you feel like you do need extra help on AO1, then please go on for Go for Schools. All the revision packs have been uploaded there for AO1 for both Paper 1 and Paper 2. Well worth a download and trying them out, and then giving them to your teacher to mark. But again, it's not the most complicated of them. If you're getting 3 or 4 marks out of 4, then you're ready to move on to the next session.